Hello, everyone. My name is Heather Katz, and I'm a doctoral candidate at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Today, I'm going to take you through a brief overview of mixed methods research, which can be shortened to MMR, specifically within the context of adapted physical education and activity. Before we get started today, I'd like to provide a brief introduction about myself to shed light on my positionality. Positionality is important in MMR so we can gain an understanding of the identities that the researcher possesses that might influence a study. I am a cisgendered woman in my 30s who's lived in Kansas, Texas, and Wisconsin. Prior to pursuing my PhD, I taught adapted physical education in Denton, Texas for 4 years. This heavily impacts my research and where I want to go with it. Additionally, I've been teaching group exercise to various populations, including people with disabilities, for over 10 years. I'm currently in my 4th year of my PhD in kinesiology at UW-Madison. An overview of what we're going to discuss today. We'll start off with the basics, the what, why, and when to use mixed methods research. Then we'll talk about theory and philosophy commonly used in MMR. We'll go over the 3 core designs of MMR. And then we'll talk about data collection, different types of data that we can collect. Then we'll talk about mixing, how we do it, what it means to mix in MMR. Then I'll provide an example of an MMR study. We'll wrap everything up talking about future directions for mixed methods research in adapted physical education and activity. So, what is MMR? Cresswell and Clark define this as quantitative and qualitative data that's collected, analyzed, and mixed to answer research questions. MMR needs to include both quantitative and qualitative data, and they have to be purposefully mixed to form conclusions. You can conduct studies that include both quantitative and qualitative data, but if they're not mixed, then it's not MMR. We'll talk more later about how we mix data. When and why should we use MMR? Most importantly, we should use MMR when it's the best way to answer a research question. Some questions can be answered sufficiently with just quantitative data collection or just qualitative data collection, or using a multimodal approach that has both kinds of data but doesn't mix them. We want to make sure when we're selecting MMR that the research question calls for it. We can use MMR when we have a need for multiple data sources to triangulate our data. We can use it when we want to provide context to quantitative data or generalized qualitative data. When we talk about providing context to quantitative data, that refers to qualitative data giving meaning behind the numbers in the categories. When we talk about generalizing qualitative data, we can use quantitative data to show that our results can apply to more people and they can best serve the population being studied. MMR can be used to compare different cases, different disabilities, different kinds of physical activity, whenever you want to compare something. And we can also use MMR to involve participants throughout the research process. Let's move on to MMR paradigms. When we talk about paradigms, we can think of them as philosophies or sets of constructs that form a way of thinking that informs our research. So there's 4 philosophies, 4 paradigms that we use quite a bit in MMR, but none of these are exclusive. But we can use pragmatism, transformative emancipation, dialectics, and critical realism. We're going to focus primarily today on pragmatism, as this can easily be tied to APE and APA research that looks to improve the lives of people with disabilities. Pragmatism is outcome oriented. We use pragmatism because we want to resolve issues faced by the disability community and improve their quality of life. The outcome orientation can help us determine meaning behind a topic, behind a construct, and it focuses on the product. So when we come to our conclusions, what are we going to do with them to help people with disabilities? Pragmatism focuses on communication and shared meaning, which is great for participatory action research, which involves the population being studied throughout the research process. So more than just using going with data collection, we can involve people with disabilities when we're developing instruments that are going to be used. We can consult with them about what they want out of the study. There are a variety of ways to include the population being studied in the research process, and pragmatism is great for that. When we involve people with disabilities in our research, this can make the results more meaningful for the community and increase the likelihood of adoption of the results. Pragmatism focuses on answering the research question. One of the most important things to remember today about MMR is that focus. And we can also analyze for transferability. So can groups outside of our study sample benefit from our results? The three core mixed methods designs are convergent, explanatory sequential, and exploratory sequential. And we're going to go into a bit of detail about each of these, but do keep in mind these are just the three basic study designs. You can mix them. We'll talk about how to mix at the design level a little bit. You can go back and forth, change it throughout your study if that's necessary. There's a lot of complexity in MMR study design, but we're going to keep it nice and simple today with these three. The convergent mixed methods research design brings together quantitative and qualitative data for comparison or combination. So when we talk about comparing different cases, this is a good study design to use. Morse describes the convergent mixed methods design as obtaining different but complementary data on the same topic. Both sets of data are collected at the same time in the convergent design. The timeline is going to be really important when we want to distinguish which type of design is being used. Data is going to be analyzed separately and then combined or mixed to form those conclusions. The explanatory sequential mixed methods research design happens when qualitative data is used to inform quantitative data. This consists of qualitative data providing an explanation for quantitative results. In terms of the timeline, we begin with quantitative data collection, and this is typically the priority in the study. So the core is looking at quantitative results, and the qualitative is just going to provide that context. As for exploratory sequential mixed methods research design, this happens when quantitative data informs the qualitative data. So it's quantitative data that's providing an explanation. When qualitative data isn't enough to answer the research question that applies to the population, we can strengthen that data with things like surveys or quantitative observations. In exploratory sequential MMR, the qualitative data is usually collected first, and it is usually the priority. This study design is often used to develop new quantitative measures. So if any of you are looking to develop a new motor skill assessment for people with disabilities, the exploratory sequential design might be your best bet. Let's talk a little bit about different types of data that we can collect. Qualitative data can consist of interviews. These are typically open-ended questions. With open-ended questions, we are searching for more than just a yes-no answer. You want the participant to provide detail about a topic. So, for example, instead of asking a person with a disability if they like PE or not, you can ask them how PE makes them feel or what a dream PE class would look like for them. We can also collect qualitative observations. Observations can be qualitative or quantitative. When we use them in the qualitative sense, this typically consists of some kind of note taking, and we can use it to develop a narrative. We can also use documents as qualitative data collection methods. Documents can be anything from a diary filled out by the participant to a lesson plan used in a physical education class to get an idea of what PE has looked like in the past, or what it currently looks like, or where the teacher wants to go with their PE program. We can also use audio-visual materials as qualitative data. Photos and videos are excellent sources of qualitative data, and they can often provide an option to lift up the voices of people with disabilities that utilize alternative modes of communication. Quantitative data. Quantitative data can consist of surveys and questionnaires, activity tracking, or motor skill assessments. With surveys and questionnaires, these are often closed-ended questions. So we're looking for yes, no, or an answer about a specific category. So we can measure the number of responses to a specific question. It makes it a little bit easier to compare. Activity tracking, this can occur through step counts with a pedometer, accelerometry, measuring minutes of physical activity for a day. And finally, we can use motor skill assessments or fitness assessments. So thinking about the TGMD or FitnessGram, there's plenty of assessments that we already use in APE and APA that can be used as quantitative data sources in a mixed methods research study. Mixing, the core of mixed methods research. Mixing can happen at many different levels throughout the study. So at the philosophical level, the design level, the methods level, and the interpretation and reporting level. When we mix at the philosophical level, we can do this, say we want to use pragmatism, but we don't feel like it adequately covers the research questions. In that case, we can mix aspects of pragmatism with something else. The major emphasis has to be on answering the research question in the best way. I'm going to say that over and over again today because it's one of the most important aspects of MMR. We can mix at the design level. So this can happen when we go back and forth in terms of sequentiality. For example, we can collect qualitative data and follow that up with quantitative data, analyze all of that, and then return to qualitative data later on to answer any questions that may have come up after collecting that quantitative data. We can mix at the methodological level. This can happen when one form of data collection informs the other. For example, you collect quantitative data to help you decide which questions to ask in a qualitative interview. We can also mix at the interpretation and reporting level when we're thinking about results. This is going to be where we focus today. When we mix at the interpretation and reporting level, this can happen in a lot of different ways. First off, we can develop a narrative, and that consists of describing both strands, the quantitative and the qualitative strand of data, and bringing them together to form a description. We can also transform data. This could be turning qualitative responses into quantitative measurements. So, for example, we could count the number of times a word or a phrase comes up in an interview and give a number to that. We can use joint displays to show how we mix data, and this is easier to show in the context of the study, so we'll go over what a joint display is a little bit later. We can also use visualizations like tables and graphs to show how the data is mixed. The ultimate goal of mixing and how we show that in the study is to provide clarity into the mixing process and how those conclusions are formed. Now, real life mixed methods research example. This just happens to be my dissertation. What we are looking to find here is to gain an understanding of physical activity, specifically group exercise, in transition programs for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Before we go over the purpose, I do want to talk about some of the acronyms that we're going to use. When I say GE, or you see GE on the screen, that's short for group exercise. IDD is going to be short for intellectual and developmental disabilities. And PSTPs, I usually won't say that acronym because it's even more of a tongue twister than the phrase itself. But if you see PSTPs on the screen or hear me say that, that's referring to post-secondary transition programs. The purpose of my study is to use an explanatory sequential mixed methods research design to gain a foundational understanding of group exercise as experienced by young adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities, so IDD, who are attending post-secondary transition programs. We also want to understand the perceptions of group exercise instructors in providing classes to young adults with IDD. These results can be used in the future to inform the development of a community-based group exercise program in partnership with post-secondary transition programs that both addresses the needs and desires of young adults with IDD and can easily be adopted and implemented by group exercise instructors, which hopefully results in more opportunities for physical activity participation for this population. The research questions we're trying to answer: how do adults with IDD perceive group exercise, and what do they need or want to participate in those classes? How do group exercise instructors perceive adults with IDD, and how does this connect to participation in their classes? And finally, what should be considered when developing group exercise programs in post-secondary transition programs? Here we have a diagram of the explanatory sequential design. That's what we're using in this study. So we're starting with quantitative data collection and analysis. Those results are going to be connected to and explained by the qualitative data collection and analysis, which will finally be mixed and used to inform our interpretation. And we're actually mixing at that methodological level for this study. We're going to be using quantitative survey data to determine what qualitative questions we'll be asking. The quantitative data collection and analysis for the adults with IDD in my study. These participants are going to be identical to those that we collect data from in the qualitative strand of adults with IDD. We'll use concurrent single group mixed method sampling with the goal of comparability. The measures we're going to be using are a demographic questionnaire, get a little bit of background information on their group exercise experiences, if they have any, and also that demographic data such as gender and race and socioeconomic status. We'll be measuring objective physical activity levels. We'll be asking participants to wear a physical activity tracker just to count steps for 2 weeks. And at the end of the study, they'll get to keep that physical activity tracker as compensation. In conjunction with wearing the physical activity tracker, we're also going to have them document what that tracker says, just to make sure everything is represented and we're getting that accurate count from the tracker. We are also, through the demographic and background questionnaire, we're going to be measuring past group exercise participation. The data that we get from the quantitative surveys and physical activity levels are going to be used to inform our semi-structured interview protocol. And semi-structured just means we have a base set of questions that we want to ask everyone, but it's okay if we trail off and ask some questions that aren't on the protocol if we think we can get relevant information to answer the research question from those participants. Our analysis plan uses descriptive statistics, so frequency, mean, standard deviation, and medians. And now moving on to the quantitative data collection and analysis for the group exercise instructors. These participants are also identical to those in the qualitative strand. We'll use concurrent single group mixed method sampling with the goal of comparability. The measures we're using for them are a demographic questionnaire and their past experiences with adults with IDD. So less quantitative data collected from the group exercise instructors, since we want our priority and our focus to be on adults with IDD in this study. Same analysis plan using descriptive statistics to understand the frequency of those answers and how those relate to group exercise and IDD. The qualitative data collection with instructors and adults with IDD is going to consist of semi-structured interviews. These interviews are guided by social cognitive theory and the RE-AIM framework. The RE-AIM framework is a public health promotion framework that will help us get answers that can be utilized to create new group exercise programs in the community. In terms of including adults with IDD throughout the research process, we will be reviewing the interview questions with a consultant group of adults with IDD that aren't participating in the study to understand if we're asking questions that are relevant to them and that will be easy for them to understand and relate to. The questions that we asked are going to be informed by quantitative data. So for the adults with IDD, we will have one set of questions for those participants that have participated in group exercise before, and one for those that have not. We are also including a group exercise video to help with the understanding of the topic. We want them to be able to see what group exercise is, to understand their familiarity with it, and to know what topic we're going to be asking them about. We're giving them the option of having a caretaker present. We want them to be as independent as possible and as they would like to be. So if they want a caretaker in the room, they can have them there, but we will have a set of regulations about what they can and can't do. We essentially just want our participant to be as comfortable as possible throughout this process. The analysis plan, the interviews are going to be transcribed verbatim and coded by 2 independent researchers using inductive open coding, and they'll be checked for quality. With the instructors, we'll use semi-structured interviews, also guided by social cognitive theory and RE-AIM. Our goal will be to reach thematic data saturation, which means that we want to get as much out of them to the point that we aren't getting any new themes and any new responses from them. The interviews are going to be audio recorded. Our analysis plan is the same as with the adults with IDD, using inductive open coding. At the very end, we're going to use the group exercise instructor interview data and compare that and contrast it with the data from the adults with IDD to see if some things that the instructors say fall in line with participation in terms of those adults with IDD. Mixing is going to occur at 2 points in this study. First being when quantitative data is analyzed and it informs the development of the qualitative protocols. We'll also be mixing when we compare the quantitative and qualitative data to arrive at the results. We discussed earlier that we would go over what a joint display is, and here we are. A joint display is going to be a visual that shows you everything about the data and how we combine them. So we'll have a spot for their physical activity level, the average step count over 2 weeks of the adults with IDD, yes or no on whether they've participated in group exercise before. We'll have example quotes, really strong quotes from adults with IDD, and that we'll tie those to a social cognitive theory construct. And then if there is a group exercise instructor quote that helps provide context or explain that quote from the adult with IDD, then we can display that right next to it. So we have this line showing how we're mixing and tying it to our theory and our quantitative data. We have not finished data collection yet, so unfortunately I can't go over the results with you, but hopefully we'll be done with that soon and we'll find some interesting stuff. So for now, let's go over mixed methods research and adapted physical education. Where are we right now? You can find a textbook chapter in the Harvey book, Mixed Methods Research in Adapted Physical Education. That's a great place of reference when you're specifically wanting to look at MMR in our field. You can also find an article led by Justin Hagel that talks about research trends in adapted physical activity, and that's going to give you a little bit about mixed methods research and give you a more current update. And something interesting about that article is that out of the 181 articles that they reviewed in terms of finding research trends, only 7 of them were considered MMR. So that's not a lot of mixed methods research in adapted physical activity. MMR is still relatively new in general, but especially in adapted physical education and activity research. Where can we go? So MMR could be great at addressing the gap of research actively involving people with disabilities. People with disabilities are often excluded from the research process. That kind of mirrors society in terms of exclusion and isolation. We want to do everything we can to involve them throughout the research process and amplify their voices. That pragmatic approach that we spoke of is very helpful in addressing current issues. We can promote generalization, helping more people, and we can provide context and acknowledge intersectionality when we use MMR research. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me via email or questions or comments. My email is hakatz3@wisc.edu. Thank you very much for your time.